This is our October Lunch and Learn on critical incident and stress management, and we are joined today. Mr. Len Murray is here to take us through all of the resources that are available, how to kind of go about that help, or what needs to be done before, during, and after these incidents to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, taking care of our partners, the public, lots of different aspects to this. So I will hand it over to Len. I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you can take the wheel here on the presentation and hopefully have some time for a question and answer session at the end as well. So Len, it's all yours.
My name's Len Murray, retired from the Des Moines Police Department after 33 years of service. Was also on the Pleasant Hill Fire Department, ran as a firefighter, an EMT, and was the fire chief there for 6 years. It was during my fire service that I was first introduced to curriculum and stress management. Really had no idea what that was about. In my law enforcement career, we had an event in Pleasant Hill that resulted in loss. It was a serious traffic fatality situation, loss of 2 lives. My paramedics really struggled to come back. Matter of fact, we had another call right after that, and none of my paramedics showed up. Had to reach out to an adjoining fire department, Altoona, to actually do mutual aid response for us. Did not understand what was going on with my people. We reached out to the Central Iowa Curriculum and Stress Management Team, which I'd never heard of. They came in and did what they called a stress debriefing. First time I was introduced to it. When I was done, so much of the stuff that I had, quite frankly, kind of packaged up, tried to forget, put away in my law enforcement career came back to me. A lot of things began to surface. And it was at that time, I'm one of these people that has to immerse themselves in knowledge when something is found. I went and became trained. I joined the Central Iowa Curriculum and Stress Management Team. I've been with them now for 23 years. As a part of that, had the opportunity to actually go to New York City following 9/11 and did debriefings and one-on-one meetings with police officers. They debriefed their entire police department, which was 38,000 officers at that time, and it took them many, many months to do that. And they invited teams from around the world to come in. So I'll walk you through these slides and we'll talk a little bit about some of those events and places that you can actually use this material. So everyone is obviously subject to stress. Almost every person's experienced. Almost every person has experienced some mental anguish or stress in their life, whether that's a natural man-made event or disaster, loss of a loved one or a pet, serious accident or injury, or some strained relationship that obviously has caused you difficulty. From birth, we've each developed our own coping mechanisms and our own way to cope with the stress and the experiences during our upbringing. So each one of us is a little different in how we deal with things that happen to us. Some professions, however, are prone to extreme stresses on a recurring basis. Public safety, law enforcement, fire rescue, emergency medical services, emergency management, hospital employees, public health services, especially during COVID, military service, and obviously there are others out there. Try and go through some definitions. A critical incident is any event or occurrence that results in strong emotional, physical, or physiological or psychological reactions that overwhelm our normal coping abilities. Critical incidents are often sudden, shocking, and may disrupt our beliefs or sense of control. It may involve an event of personal significance, such as emotional or physical loss. Critical incident stress is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. We're all going to probably experience some level of reaction. Critical incident stress management is an integrated multi-component crisis intervention system used to achieve the goal of crisis stabilization and symptom mitigation. The thing you have to kind of keep in mind is everybody tends to focus in on stress debriefings, and that's the only thing out there. There are many things, and we're going to talk about some of them, that can be done before, during, and after a crisis occurs. The curriculum stress management team consists of mental health professionals and peers trained to provide stress interventions in accordance with the teachings of and courses of assisting individuals in crisis and group intervention that are actually part of the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. When I responded to New York, I was there with a team from Switzerland, one from Canada, one from South Dakota, and then the Central Iowa team. We were all trained on the same platform. We all had the same understanding, and we mixed and matched team members, quite frankly, during these briefings because they were so large, the number of people that were actually, and we try and match up, obviously, the responders, the peers, with the people that we're actually dealing with. Peer support team is an internal agency team whose members must be designated by the head of their agency and have received training to provide emotional and moral support and counseling for peers. Peer support team should be monitored by a mental health professional. A peer group counselor definition and confidentiality protections are provided in Iowa Code Section 62210 sub 9. A crisis response team provides mental health or victim services to individuals and groups involved in traumatic events. They provide counseling and clinical, behavioral, and mental health services to enhance the recovery of victims, witnesses, neighborhoods, businesses in the aftermath of significant traumatic events. So talk a little bit about the ICISF. It was really founded by Jeff Mitchell and George Everly. That's pretty much what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about. There are other models out there that different groups use when they actually approach folks to do crisis intervention. But I'm really focused on first responders in this session, but we are going to talk about some things you can do for community as well. Many people also refer to this as the Mitchell model. If you're not familiar with that, or if you see something in writing talking about the Mitchell model, that's really the ICISF's tools for dealing with traumatic events. I think we're stuck, Brett. Thank you. Crisis intervention is a short-term process to help someone in crisis. It's really intended to stabilize and mitigate stress symptoms. Support is provided through information and guidance to the group. It allows a person to ventilate their thoughts and emotions by telling their story. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Teaches stress coping skills and provides access to resources. Our goal is to restore a person in crisis to normal functioning or assist in providing them a referral to a higher level of care. We can't fix everything. The important part is recognizing when we've gone to the point we've done everything we can do and handing them off to someone who is able to carry them further through that process. Relationships, and this is my philosophy from work. Whenever I was in a squad, whenever I was a sergeant with a group of officers or I was a watch commander, I spent time to know my people. I wanted to understand them, their family, what their ambitions were, what their goals were within the agency, where did they plan to be? A part of that was I wanted to know what support systems they had available. If something happens to this individual, are they going to be home and be all by themselves? Or are they going home and have someone that they can talk to, somebody else that's kind of keeping an eye out for them? In responders, a lot of us have had family members that are also responders, whether that's police, fire, EMS. A lot of folks, when they're experiencing trauma, if they have another family member, they will reach out to them and say, hey, I'm really troubled by this call. What do I do? How did you cope with this, dad, mom, brother, whatever? So the important part about this is you need to do that in advance of the event to develop that trust and rapport with your employees. These casual conversations should be sincere and they should be ongoing throughout their career or your time with them. Your first real conversation with someone who's in crisis shouldn't be when they're in the middle of that personal or professional event. Potential traumatic events, it doesn't mean that every one of these is going to be traumatic for all people, but here's kind of a list of some professional things. Again, serious injury, death of a coworker suicide, fatalities, mass casualty events, natural disasters, acts of terrorism, prolonged incidents with a loss of life, excessive media coverage, which is quite common with some things where they replay them over and over and over. Some possible personal events, loss of spouse, child, parent, sibling, loss of job, promotion or position, income, physical pain, severe injury, serious accident, illness, or medical procedure, the victim or witness to an act of community violence, domestic abuse, physical or emotional, sexual abuse or rape, conflicts with coworkers or supervisors, workplace harassment, intimidation, or violence, or the potential for arrest and incarceration for some wrongdoing. Obviously, those would be traumatic for anybody in this room, and obviously during this process we're going through here. Preparation, pre-incident education. It really is important to try and meet with employees when you onboard them to let them know these are some of the things you may experience in this job. Here are some of the resources we have available to you, you know, your employee assistance programs, et cetera, just to kind of get them on board with being prepared if something happens to them. They've kind of got in their mind that that is something that was likely to occur. And it gives you an opportunity to share a list of available resources with them with direct contact information. It's nice if you can post those resources for folks someplace where they can get to them, that they don't have, if you're the boss, they don't have to go to the boss and say, hey, I'm having some problems. I'd like to reach out to EAP, but I don't know what the phone number is. I'd like to reach out to peer support team, but I don't know who's on the team, what that contact information is. Many people want to keep that personal and private, and you need to be able to post that information so they have ready access to it. Strategic planning. If you call for assistance to a team, there are some things that they're going to ask you. And a part of that is theme. What happened? When did it happen? Were there any prevalent concerns? So what I mean by prevalent concerns, was there a failure of a piece of equipment? Was weather an issue? Was it difficult to get the boat in a water rescue situation? Was there a issue between two responders or two agencies on a call? Because if we know that in advance, one, we're prepared to deal with it as a team. The other part of it is it may then be, we need to do these two groups separately instead of putting them together where we're basically just going to have an argument and we're not going to accomplish our goals of stabilization and bringing them back, if you will. Targets who and how many people are impacted and need support. Type, what stress interventions are we going to employ? There are a number. Timing, when and where are we going to provide services? I have received calls from chiefs saying, hey, we need to do a critical incident stress debriefing. When would you like to do that? Well, I'd like to do it this afternoon. Okay, when did this event happen? Oh, they're still on scene. We'll talk about stress debriefings in a little bit, but generally we don't do that until 48, 72 hours after the fact, because we need them to actually have a rest cycle, have them understand how this has impacted them, and actually start to process what's going on before we bring them into that environment. Teams, who is the best trained and experienced to provide services? So we are going to make this information available to everybody, but that is kind of a planning worksheet that you could print and use. The target, first responders, and I've walked through the various interventions that could be used, the timing for each of those interventions, and who could be employed to help deal with or provide those interventions. And you can see there's a spot in there I put in for families of victims and responders. And then there are a couple of things we can also do with communities following a major event. Interventions, assessment. Assessments are an ongoing everyday process that really you don't have to be trained to do, but it's the eyes and ears for, quite frankly, the department. It's you paying attention to your coworkers. It's supervisors paying attention to the folks that are working with them to, hey, I noticed something's a little different, or I know you responded to this situation yesterday. I'm sure that was a difficult call. Do you want to sit down and talk about that? Share some of your thoughts and emotions about, you know, what you're dealing with. You know, it gives you an opportunity to help them work through their situation. This demonstrates that you care about them and it shows compassionate care or presence. That's really what chaplaincy's programs are really about. It is showing that compassionate care or presence. So individual crisis intervention really is a one-on-one with a trained coworker here. It's provided anytime, any place. I will tell you, a lot of what I had done in my law enforcement career was literally people coming in, sitting down and saying, hey, I've got this issue. A lot of times it was a personal issue. We would do it there. If it was on the street, it was pulling up car door to car door, and we talked from car to car out on the street. As an EMT, responding back in the ambulance from the hospital, that was our opportunity to sit down and have a conversation about how that response went, what we did, you know, are we comfortable with that? Did you know the person we just treated? Because obviously those things are very impactful as you're dealing with those traumatic events. Diffusings are small groups of like responders exposed to the same event. It's provided by 2 trained peers, generally within 2 hours of the traumatic event, but not longer than 8 to 12 hours. If we send somebody home, we don't want to bring them back to do a diffusing. We move on with another intervention. There's basically 3 phases. The introduction, we introduce the team, the guidelines, what we're going to do, and we offer individual support afterwards. We will be here afterwards if you need to talk to us because you don't want to share something in front of your peers. Exploration, that's really where the participants share their stories, what they did, their reaction to the situation, and then we come back and provide information. We normalize the reactions, we teach stress management techniques, and generally you don't want to go more than 20 to 30 minutes when you're doing a diffusing. The note, we do not do this in disaster responses or line of duty deaths. There's different processes that need to be followed. Critical and stress debriefing. This is where everybody, you know, kind of gets on board with CISM. First responders in the military with existing relationships, shared history and time together before the incident and responded to the same event. Provided by trained mental health professional and peers, generally 48 to 72 hours post-event. And I have done them as long as 10 days post-event. But in some of those situations, people have already started recovery, if you will. They really may not want to discuss. They're trying to put it behind them so that we can do it soon, but not sooner than 48 hours. It really is 7 phases. Again, the same introduction piece. The fact we ask the responders to share their role on that response and what their actions were. Not so much what they were thinking or feeling, but what they did. What did their body do on scene? The value to that in a group process is we tend to get tunnel vision and we only see our portion of that response. We don't understand what happened over there. We don't understand why somebody did something else or even who was on scene. When everybody is willing to share their piece, it fills in those puzzle pieces, gives us a more complete picture, and that information really reduces the stress for everybody that was on scene. Thought, we asked them what was their first or prominent thoughts during that response. Did something happen that kind of triggered you? The reaction, what is causing them the most distress following this call? And we'll often ask, what was the worst part of this event for you? And if you notice, we're taking them through a factual thought-based process and we're taking them down into a deep emotional piece. So at that point, they'll tell you, this is the part, this is the biggest struggle for me. I can't get that sound out of my head. The sound is screaming. I can't get that visual. I keep seeing this child's face and the injuries. And those are the kinds of things that oftentimes they will begin to tell you, I'm having some reactions. I keep seeing this. I keep hearing this. Those are the things, those symptoms. And we ask specifically, what have you noticed different about yourself since this event? Are you having problems sleeping, problems eating, etc.? So we get that out and then we teach to the symptoms that the group is expressing. And then we do reentry. We answer any questions. We provide any closing comments. But critical stress debriefings are not used for line of duty deaths or coworker suicides. Another caveat I will add is if you're in a law enforcement agency and the officer was had to use deadly force, we do not invite the officers to critical and stress debriefings. We will do them separately as one-on-ones. We recommend that agencies, and most agencies do across the state now, will send them to a psychologist to sit down and have a discussion with them. We don't invite them into curriculum and success debriefings, especially if the investigation's ongoing, because we don't want a whole lot more people hearing the story and walking out of that room, even though it's confidential, somebody say something to somebody else, and then pretty soon we compromise the case or the individual, et cetera. So just a point. Rest Information Transition Services, RITS, they call it. It's used only for emergency services and military personnel at the end of their first work cycle. So for emergency managers that are in the room, that really is that. We've had this natural disaster, we've had a tornado, we've had a flood, we've had people out. They've been working for 12 or more hours, and we're going to bring them in before we dismiss them and do this RITS, if you will. So long duration events, man-made natural disasters provided by an authority figure, usually the incident commander, supported by trained peers immediately after the work team's released from duty. We provide responders with an overview of the event, basically so they understand everything that was going on, answer their questions, teach self-care, provide food, rest, and reporting information for when they need to be back on shift, where they need to be, and the timing of that. And peers perform assessments, individual support, make recommendations to command on things that they're observing. Generally, you don't want to go longer than 30 minutes. And the reason for that is they've already worked 12 to 14 hours on an event. They're tired, they're worn out, they need to get some food, they need to get some water, they need to get hydrated. We do not do RITS for routine or small events or for the community itself. Crisis management briefings. This is something we can do for the community and our responders. So it's used for first responders, military personnel returning to work on a large scale multi-day event. Also used for communities or diverse groups experiencing a significant traumatic event, such as residents, businesses, schools, hospitals, government officials. It's provided by a credible source, again, incident commander, somebody that knows what's going on and can provide and respond to questions, supported by trained peers, mental health professionals after the situation is stabilized, or for emergency responders when they are being returned to work, a large scale multi-day event. The credible authority provides a factual overview and current status of the event, answers the questions, while the trained responders normalize stress reactions, teach self-care, and identify resources that are available to them. Peers are always performing the assessments, keeping an eye on people, what's going on. Is somebody so affected, we need to get them relieved from duty because they're not able to perform their job because they're so overwhelmed with their own situation. And that could be a situation where the responders working an event, they lost their house in the tornado, their mind's on my family, my home, and they may not be the best person to be putting back out there in the field. Duration typically 20 to 45 minutes. It may be repeated multiple times, regular intervals, or when new information needs to be disseminated. AJ and I responded to Parkersburg after the tornado. Jason Johnson, who was the sheriff, was the incident commander. Jason actually did this 4 times a day. So he would meet with folks as a part of the planning process in the morning. He would meet with the responders and say, here's your assignments. Here's what I expect to get accomplished today. Any information he needed, part weather, et cetera, et cetera. The peers were there to kind of keep an eye on folks, and off to work they went. He would leave there, go to the community center on the west side of town that had not been impacted by tornado damage, and he would meet with the community. This is what we did yesterday. This is the information we know. This is what I hope to get accomplished today. Keeping them informed so that, quite frankly, again, information lowers that stress level for people when there are answers to questions. And it was an area, obviously, where they had clothing and water and other things available to them. The community did, as well as the responders. So he would do that again at the end of the day. We'd bring the people off work, they would report out, he would meet with them, give them reporting instructions for the next day. He would go meet with the community. This is what we're able to accomplish. I didn't get as far as I had hoped to today. Give them a chance to vent some concerns, and then we would put that in the planning process for the next cycle the next morning. Family crisis intervention, pre-event education, and post-event support as needed. Families of victims and emergency responders is indicated, and they're eligible for the full breadth of interventions and assessments as needs indicate. I will tell you, we had a loss of life event in Des Moines. I had already retired. I was summoned back to help them with the strategic planning. What are we going to do? We lost the officer. What do we do for all of the people that responded to that event? So we went through that worksheet and basically decided, here's what we're going to do. Here's the groups that are going to do it. I neglected to take into account the family side of it. We had many spouses that were impacted beyond belief. If you remember back in 2016 timeframe, we had a lot of officers across this country that literally were being assassinated, shot in their cars, shot at restaurants, those kinds of things. That was very difficult for those significant others and spouses to deal with. They did not want their officers to go back to work. They wanted them to quit. We ended up with a group that showed up. It was the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team. You have a major event, especially a loss of an employee situation. All kinds of groups will show up wanting to set up accounts and things. We'll collect money. We'll only take 10 or 15% off the top, and all kinds of, if you will, scams or shams that show up. So we had already sent some people away. This group showed up while we were doing a crisis management briefing, and I was kind of, I was looking at my peer support team leader going, and he's looking at me, and I finally took them outside and I said, who are you? And how did you get here? Well, one of the police chaplains had invited this group in, unbeknownst to anybody else. I met with them. They were ICISF trained, so they were doing the same things we're doing, which was great. And they were all public safety peers. They were police officers, sheriffs, firefighters. They had that responder background to them. So Chris Scott, who's now the West Des Moines Chief of Police, actually took them out to our police academy, put the family out there, the spouses, and they did that, which quite frankly relieved a lot of tension for the family. And also they felt free to share because they weren't talking to the chief of police or somebody within the Des Moines Police Department, who obviously is already in their own tragedy, if you will, and coping with their own responses. So it was really a wonderful thing. So all I'm saying there is make sure you vet people when they show up at the door. Why are you here? Who invited you? And are they legitimate or not before you employ them? Pastoral crisis intervention. Most response agencies have a chaplaincy program of some kind. It is important as part of their training, maybe to get them trained in ICISF in these situations so that they understand the interventions that are out there and available. We actually have on the Central Iowa CISM team a chaplain that works with Waukee Police and Fire, which is great for us. Because he also brings that added side to things. So again, faith-based chaplaincy programs for spiritual support. Follow-up and referral. Follow-up is generally one of the things we often forget. Follow-up is extremely important, that we go back to the people that we have served to make sure they're still doing okay and those agencies are able to cope with what's going on. If not, we need to start looking at what else can we do for them, or the resources we can bring to bear on the problem, or help them find a higher level of care. Because we only do one debriefing. If people are still struggling after that, we need to think about moving them on to someone else, professional help. Signs and symptoms of stress. I know that's extremely small to see, but there are a number of them, obviously, that go from physical kinds of things. One thing I'll say about physical, when a first responder is involved in a serious traumatic event, especially if it's a near loss of life kind of thing, their heart rate may go from 70 beats per minute to 220 beats per minute. And when that happens, they may experience chest pain. They may experience difficulty breathing. We truly recommend when somebody's been involved in a situation like that, that we see that they get medical attention, whether that's on scene from a paramedic or whether that's taking them to the hospital afterwards to follow up to make sure that whatever needs to happen to get their heart rate back under control. I can't tell you, every year in the state of Iowa, you read a story about a fire chief in particular that goes out on a scene. It's a traumatic scene. It could be a loss of life fire event. They're concerned about the people. They're doing what they need to do. They go home, they sit back in their chair and collapse and die from a heart attack. So it's important when you begin to recognize those stress symptoms, if it's physical and it's severe, that we get them medical treatment. Cognitive, I mean, some people report, hey, I just can't concentrate at work. I don't know what I'm doing. Nothing seems to make sense to me. Emotional, obviously people may feel sad. A lot of times when we do debriefings, people say they feel guilty or responsible for what happened, or they don't feel like they did enough. That was a common theme, quite frankly, in New York City, was guilt. A lot of people refer to those folks as heroes. I will tell you, they didn't respond kindly to being called a hero. I'm not a hero. The heroes are the ones that died when the building went down. The only reason I survived was because I ran from the scene as the building was collapsing. So be very careful when you do intervention work about how you address people and what's going on with them. Behavioral, obviously, there can be changes to people's behavior. I am one of these individuals that's very talkative. So when I would come home after work, if I was under stress, I was very quiet, withdrawn, would kind of avoid my family. My wife, who at that time was a ward clerk at Blank Hospital in the ER, she would see a lot of stuff, obviously kids coming in with very traumatic injuries or that died because of some sort of an assault. We would play off of each other. We were able to talk and freely exchange information about how we were feeling and dealing with things. So right away, if you're doing your homework, if you will, knowing your people, you know what stresses them and you know when you need to reach out and address them and help them through those situations. So all this kind of builds on the previous thoughts of making sure we're doing assessments, we're doing one-on-ones and looking for those signs and symptoms of stress. So managing stress, self-care, what can we do for ourselves? Drink plenty of water to flush the byproducts of stress from your system. A lot of chemicals, obviously, adrenaline will form. If you get water in your system, it'll help move it on. Avoid the overuse of caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, and medications. Eat well-balanced and regular meals. Some people report, oh, my stomach, I just don't feel good. I have this intestinal distress. Avoid the greasy, fatty foods and high salt concentrations, which is very difficult for responders, especially in small towns, because where are you going to go? You know, name the convenience store that has something that they can grab off the bar, if you will. So that becomes a part of it. Participate in periods of exercise, followed by some relaxation, whether that's reading books, sitting down, doing something you enjoy, a hobby kind of thing. We don't recommend you do the exercise right before you're ready to go to bed, because obviously you're all amped up at that point. Do it a couple hours before. Get plenty of rest and overnight sleep. Keep your normal routine and structure your time with planned activities. Spend time with your family, friends, and coworkers. Realize those around you are also likely experiencing similar stress symptoms, because if they were involved in that same event, they're impacted as well. They may cope with it differently because, again, it depends how many years of service they have. Your service doesn't always mean everything, because quite frankly, they could be having another response because of an event that happened in their past, that this event brought some of that emotion and feeling and thoughts back to them. I think the most important thing is talk to people you have confidence and trust. Talking through your traumatic event will help you process your experience by putting words to your thoughts and your emotions. A lot of people will go through this and go, I don't know, I'm still mad. I don't know why I feel guilty. And they're not able to actually go through that process of putting words to why they feel bad. When they tell their story, some of that becomes known to whoever they're telling their story to, and you can help them understand why they're having these responses. This is a list of some responder programs and resources. For Central Iowa, I listed the Central Iowa Curriculum Stress Management Teams. The state is also listed there. Iowa has a disaster behavioral health team. The Iowa Curriculum Stress Management Hotline, which is actually answered by the Story County Sheriff's Office, will get you a list of the team lead and contact information or the alternate for each county. Central Iowa Peer Support Teams, believe me, there are many more than I have on that list. That is some of the more well-established that have been there longer, more experienced, if you will, and their contact information. Mental health professionals, obviously this is where you'd want to share your employee assistant program information. Obviously that varies by agency. There are a couple there that have been vetted. The one thing I would say, if you're dealing with responders, make sure you're reaching out and vetting the actual therapist or counselor or psychologist to make sure they have an understanding of what first responders go through, if you will, that professional competence piece. Because I will tell you, we have had situations where a therapist has sat down with an officer or a group and they begin to talk about their experiencing and what the trouble is that they're having. And they get very emotional during their stories and very graphic about describing it. And some counselors are not able to cope with that level of detail. That quite frankly, in one event that I've been made aware, the counsel actually broke down, cried, and was unable to continue providing services. Can you imagine the responders themselves, how they felt? Oh my God, I'm so messed up that I broke my therapist. I broke my support. So just take the time when somebody reaches out that you're kind of looking at them with, tell me a little bit about your history. Who have you served? You know, get some referral information, check on them and their background and their experience before you employ them, especially in first responder agencies. Okay. Crisis response teams and services, Polk County Crisis Advocacy Services, they will come out and deal with families and victims of especially severe crime situations, rape, sexual abuse situations, and others. They will help them through the court process if they are going to be a witness or sit through a trial. They are a great resource. Keep them in mind. What we often forget, though, are the heartland area education agencies across the state. There are multiple AEAs out there that have crisis teams. While they call it something different, I've sat down with Heartland. They actually follow the ICISF protocols and interventions. Stacy Warren, a great person up there, one of their team leads. They are specially trained to deal with school staff, parents, and students. If you have a major event in school and the school is unable to actually provide services or they're asking for services, I would make that referral back to the AEA and let them take charge of that piece. I was telling Brett earlier, we had an event up in Woodward where a child stepped out between a couple of cars and was struck by a parent at the end of school, and it was a fatality. We were up there dealing with the responders. At the same time, unbeknownst to me, Stacy and her team were up there for the school and the parents and the students, you know. So keep in mind, it's not one team services all. It's making sure you bring the right resources together based upon the target, the group of people or groups of people we're bringing together to try and support. Any one of us can step in and help provide you some guidance on strategic planning if an event happens in your community. I truly believe these resources are probably underutilized in the state of Iowa, well, underutilized in quite frankly, the whole country. I think there's been opportunities for tornadoes and flooding situations where teams could be deployed and help. I think we missed an opportunity, and AJ and I talked about that with COVID-19, that the EOC was obviously up and running. We had public health people in here. We had responder agencies in here. We had political officials in here. It may have been an opportunity to have a trained peer in here just to monitor what was going on. If we saw somebody stressed, maybe, hey, this person maybe needs to step out for a little bit. We need to get them to disengage for a little bit just to get back and control themselves and come back to work. Anyhow, just kind of think as you're going through this, are there opportunities or missed opportunities that we've had where we could have employed these services? That is the Iowa Curriculum Stress Management Network map. I'm actually the coordinator, have been since 17 or 18. You can see the central Iowa team is that light blue area that really is, if you will, central down to south central Iowa to the Missouri border. But there are individual teams with leadership across the state of Iowa. So if there's anybody on the broadcast side of this on Zoom, there are teams out there and available. If you get a hold of Story County Sheriff's Office, they can provide you that information, or you can contact me. Iowa area education agencies, obviously the map's a little different. So again, you can see how they, I'm really confused about how they came up with their jagged edges. But if you need to reach out, they have their own response map available. And I'm ready for any further discussion. Any questions anybody has or any comments at this point? Everything's fair game for me.
Can we go back to your map? Is there not anybody in Southwest Iowa?
Yes, that beige area. Yeah, that's actually the Southwest Iowa team. They were based out of Council Bluffs. There's several peer support teams there as well now. Council Bluffs, Potawatomi County Sheriff's Office has their own peer support team, but there is a regional response team. Krista Kotros from the Department of Public Safety. I don't know if anybody's met her. She has now taken over the peer support team piece for the state of Iowa and their critical incident management response. She's actually based in Council Bluffs. And she's available to come out and assist responder agencies and communities when things happen. The Crisis K-9 is a great program. We've had a lot of discussion with them. There's a desire for them to participate in debriefings. I'm just going to vent this out. What we've talked about is they're great in the station. They're great for most of these interventions, you know, the one-on-one kinds of things, the diffusing, having them present. But during the actual debriefing process, we want people to be thinking about themselves, how they responded, how this event impacted them personally. They need to be able to remember the question that was asked and respond appropriately. They need to listen to the other responders' stories and what their responses were. The advantage to group process is really the process of I'm not alone. You felt the same way I felt. You saw that too, and it disturbed you. You know what I mean? So if there's a canine up walking around and you are distracted, I mean, we try to set up a room with tables or without tables, chairs in a circle. If there's a CPR dummy in there and this is a traffic fatality or something, we get the dummy out of sight. We don't want people walking in there and suddenly seeing something that takes them back to that scene right away. We try to, make sure somebody's not going to walk in. We close doors, we post signs, we shut off the PA system because we don't want suddenly an alarm to go off, and people, okay, now I'm distracted. Okay, where were we? What were we doing? Who said what? So we try and remove the distractions. Crisis K-9s, I think, are a great asset, but it's not something we want in the debriefing process because they may in fact be a distraction. Well-trained, certified, well-trained ones, if you put a mat down, they'll go to that mat and sit there and they won't move. I'm all in. But unfortunately, not all of them are. Some of them are young pups, some of them haven't been certified yet, and quite frankly, they get up and mill around, they go over and start getting into other things. That becomes the difficulty. We have to remember, why are we there? We're there to focus on the responder, to restore them and that group back to normal functioning so that they can go out and answer that next call. That's the goal. Did I answer your question kind of, sort of?
Yeah, there wasn't a star in Southwest Iowa, so I thought maybe they didn't have one.
It's kind of like
That was my
Is
question.
it Council Bluffs? Is it Ottawatomie County, which obviously the seat would be Council Bluffs? It's trying to figure out where do I put that? It's really where the team is based out of. And right now, I don't know if there's a clear base for their team. Like the North Iowa CSM teams in Mason City. Excuse me. So obviously the Stars in Mason City. Anybody else?
Or a community event where you'd have a response, where you'd have an incident that could affect a neighborhood. Or, talk about a vetting process, but there's also like an invitation process to that. What would be a recommendation on not only the invitation process, you don't have someone, well, my sister's brother's cousin's friend lives 3 blocks away and I'm affected and I drove down from Minneapolis. And then vetting that out as well.
A crisis management briefing is what I would recommend in that situation. And I know the situation we're talking about.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, it doesn't matter. Because really what we're doing is we're pushing information. We would get somebody that has information about what occurred, what are the steps in the investigation, you know, what's going to happen going forward, and basically get in front of the people. And it really is, it's an information push for the most part. But we staff that with mental health professionals, counselors, peers in the room. And somebody gets up in front of the group and say, you know, these may be some of the emotions, you know, some of the reactions you may experience from this event. You know, this was a traumatic event. You know, some of you may be worried. I mean, you may be scared. May have guilt. Whatever those kinds of things are. And what you do is basically say, here are a few things, not that you're going to experience them or all of these things, but here's a few things. There's a worksheet we can kind of hand out to them that says, here are typical, well, that sheet I showed you.
Right.
You know, these are typical things that you may experience. And we do a little education. We're going to stand by afterwards. If anybody needs to talk one-on-one, just needs to vent, get something off their chest. And we make sure those resources stay there. But as long as you have a room that's large enough to hold whatever number of people you bring, it's not like we're trying to do this for 10 or 12 people, or that we're getting into any deep emotional, tell me what your reactions are and how you're processing this event. It really is, here's the information, here's the things you may experience, here's how to provide self-care. And we leave, other than maybe the handful of folks that are there to actually support those individuals that may be a little more distressed than others.
Yeah.
Any CISM team should be able to step in and help you do that or plan for it, or how do I get that information out, et cetera, which obviously social media is one place. Speaking of social media, we try to encourage first responders to stay off social media for the first 48 hours after an event. You want to talk about stress levels going up. Almost every debriefing now that we do, somebody will talk about, well, these SOBs, you know, how they weren't there. They don't know. Somebody always makes some stupid statement. And quite frankly, what does that do to the responders? Their stress level goes way up. They can't sleep because they keep thinking about what they read or potentially saw on TV. So we encourage them, avoid the newscast, avoid social media for 48 hours. Usually somebody will step in and correct the record. You know, you don't have to feel compelled to be the one to do that. And you know, little social media kick.
Sure.
Have you found this helpful in general? I hope so. Always available to be there for you. Probably kick that back up. There's my email address. There's my cell phone number. Anytime, any conversation. You have an event, you just want to bounce something off of somebody, you need support at some level. Please reach out. I'll do anything I can, obviously, to help you. My personal goal is to keep first responders doing the work that, quite frankly, they're very passionate about, that they've been trained for, that they've been experienced. Oftentimes they may become overwhelmed and decide this is not the correct career path for them. That's okay, you know, to step away, but I want to make sure they're stepping away for the right reasons and that they're mentally and physically okay when they make that decision. And the other thing is we have suicides of first responders across this nation and quite frankly, in this state, in Des Moines, we average one every 5 years. Loss of a police officer, fire departments had some as well, attempts as well as, completions. My goal is to be there for them, reach out in advance, try to get them, the help that they need to get through their personal crisis, because I don't want to lose anybody. I just don't. Mark and I are not looking at each other nodding. I mean, we have lost coworkers, friends, and it's very difficult because you never know why, never understand why. And really wish we had one more opportunity to reach out to them to keep them here. So thanks for your time and trouble. I'm glad that you felt compelled to come and sit through this class with me.
Thanks, Len.